Muslim woman bullied in a cafe, then Shaq steps in to defend her. How will this story turn out? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Amina adjusted her hijab as she stepped into her favorite cafe, the soft chime of the doorbell signaling her arrival. The familiar aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air, and she smiled as she made her way to her usual table by the window. It was her favorite spot, a small corner with just enough sunlight streaming through the glass to make her feel at ease. The cafe was bustling with activity as always. College students huddled over laptops, groups of friends chatted animatedly, and business professionals typed away on their phones. Amina liked the atmosphere here. It was lively but not overwhelming, and the staff were usually friendly enough. She often came here to work on her nonprofit initiatives, which focused on providing resources for immigrant women navigating their new lives in the city. Today, Amina was finalizing plans for a fundraiser. Her organization, Empower Together, was hosting a community dinner to raise money for language classes and job training programs. She sipped her latte, her mind racing with ideas for how to make the event as impactful as possible. As she worked, a small group of teenagers entered the cafe, their laughter echoing through the room. Amina glanced up briefly, noticing how carefree they seemed. It reminded her of her own teenage years, filled with hope and dreams despite the challenges of being a first-generation immigrant. She turned back to her laptop, typing out an email to a potential sponsor. The cafe's noise faded into the background as she focused on her work. But her concentration was soon interrupted by the sound of a man's voice, a sharp, mocking tone that cut through the chatter like a knife. "Don't you think it's hot wearing that thing on your head?" the man said loudly, his words laced with sarcasm. Amina froze. She didn't need to look up to know he was talking about her. It wasn't the first time someone had made a comment like that, but it still stung every time. She slowly raised her head, her eyes meeting the man's. He was in his mid-30s, wearing a hoodie and holding a cup of coffee. His face was twisted in an exaggerated expression of mockery, and he smirked when he saw her reaction. Amina took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I said," the man repeated, louder this time, "isn't it uncomfortable wearing that scarf all the time? Or are you trying to make some kind of statement?" The cafe fell silent. Conversation stopped, and all eyes turned toward the commotion. Amina felt the weight of everyone's gaze on her, some curious, others uncomfortable. She glanced around, hoping someone might step in, but the bystanders seemed frozen in place, unsure of what to do. "I wear it because it's part of my faith," Amina said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "It's my choice." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Your choice, huh? Sure it is. It's all about control, isn't it? Don't you want to be free?" Amina's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel her cheeks flush with a mix of anger and humiliation. "I am free," she said firmly. "And I don't owe you an explanation." The man rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath, but his volume was enough for the words brainwashed and backward to reach her ears. Amina clenched her fists under the table, willing herself to stay composed. From a corner table, Shaquille O'Neal, better known to the world as Shaq, watched the scene unfold. He had been quietly enjoying his coffee, hoping to remain unnoticed, but the man's loud and demeaning comments had caught his attention. Shaq wasn't one to shy away from standing up for what was right, and what he was witnessing made his blood boil. The cafe's patrons were still silent, their discomfort palpable as the man continued his tirade. Amina tried to focus on her breathing, her mind racing for the right words to defuse the situation without escalating it further. "You know," the man said, his tone dripping with condescension, "people like you make everyone else uncomfortable. This is America. Maybe it's time you start acting like it." Amina's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a deep, commanding voice cut through the tension. "Hey." Shaq's voice was steady, but it carried an undeniable authority. Heads turned as the towering figure of Shaquille O'Neal rose from his chair, his broad frame unmistakable even in the crowded cafe. The man who had been harassing Amina faltered, his smirk disappearing as he looked up at Shaq. The former basketball star's imposing presence seemed to shrink him on the spot. "Is there a problem here?" Shaq asked, his voice calm but firm. He stepped closer, positioning himself between Amina and her harasser. The man hesitated, his confidence wavering. "I was just saying what everyone's thinking," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. It's a free country." Shaq folded his arms across his chest, his gaze unwavering. "Yeah, it is," he said. And that means everyone has the right to be here without being harassed. You've made your point and now it's time for you to leave. Amina stared at Shaq, her shock quickly turning to gratitude. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, one of the most recognizable figures in the world standing up for her in a moment of vulnerability. The man meanwhile looked flustered, his bravado completely gone. I wasn't trying to, the man began, but Shaq raised a hand to cut him off. You've said enough, Shaq said, his voice firm but calm. It takes a lot more strength to show respect than to tear someone down. So why don't you do the respectful thing and leave her alone? The cafe was completely silent, every patron hanging on Shaq's words. The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing around and realizing that no one was coming to his defense. With a muttered curse, he grabbed his coffee and stormed out of the cafe, slamming the door behind him. As the tension in the room eased, Amina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Shaq turned to her, his expression softening. Are you okay? He asked, his tone gentle. Amina nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. I didn't know what to do. Shaq pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, his presence both comforting and reassuring. You don't have to thank me, he said. You handled yourself with a lot of grace. I just made sure he understood that kind of behavior isn't okay. The cafe's patrons began to return to their conversations, though many cast glances in Amina and Shaq's direction. Amina felt a mixture of relief and awkwardness, but she also felt a growing sense of gratitude toward the man sitting across from her. What's your name? Shaq asked, breaking the silence. Amina, she said. Oh, I'm really grateful for what you did. Shaq smiled warmly. Amina, that's a beautiful name. And don't mention it. It's the least I could do. As the cafe settled back into its usual rhythm, Amina still felt the weight of the incident lingering in the air. While she was relieved that the man had left, the humiliation and tension from his words clung to her like a heavy cloud. She glanced at Shaq, who was now casually sipping his coffee, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the charged atmosphere from moments earlier. Are you sure you're okay? Shaq asked again, his deep voice filled with genuine concern. Amina nodded hesitantly, though her voice betrayed her lingering unease. I'm now, thanks to you. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stepped in. Shaq leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You handled yourself with a lot of composure, he said, his tone warm. Not everyone would have been able to stay as calm as you did. That guy, he was way out of line. Amina felt her cheeks flush slightly, a mix of embarrassment and appreciation for his words. It's not the first time I've had to deal with something like that, she admitted. But it's the first time someone's actually stood up for me. Shaq's brow furrowed, his expression turning serious. Well, that's not right. You shouldn't have to deal with that kind of nonsense. No one should. Their conversation was interrupted when the cafe manager approached their table. He was a young man in his late 20s, looking nervous but determined as he addressed Amina. I just wanted to apologize, the manager said, his voice quiet but sincere. I should have stepped in sooner. I didn't know how to handle it, but that's not an excuse. I'm really sorry you had to go through that. Amina offered him a small, understanding smile. Thank you, she said. I appreciate that. It's not easy to know what to do in situations like that, but acknowledging it means a lot. The manager nodded, visibly relieved by her response. He turned to Shaq, his expression shifting to one of awe. And, thank you too, he added. That was incredible. I've never seen anyone shut someone down like that. Shaq gave a modest shrug. It's just about doing the right thing, he said. But I hope this is a lesson for everyone here. When you see something like that happening, you can't just stay quiet. You've got to speak up. The manager nodded again, his face thoughtful as he walked back to the counter. Amina watched him go, feeling a glimmer of hope that the incident might lead to positive change. As Shaq and Amina resumed their conversation, she found herself opening up about her experiences as a Muslim woman in the city. She told him about her nonprofit work and her passion for helping immigrant women build better lives for themselves and their families. I started Empower Together because I wanted to create a safe space, Amina explained. A lot of the women I work with have faced so much discrimination, both subtle and overt. They just want to feel like they belong, like they're valued. Shaq listened intently, nodding as she spoke. That's powerful, he said. It takes a lot of strength to turn your own challenges into something that helps others. You're making a real difference. Amina smiled, touched by his words. Thank you. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. And moments like today remind me why it's so important. What do you mean? Shaq asked. Well, Amina said, pausing to gather her thoughts. Seeing someone like you stand up for me, it shows that there are people who care, who are willing to use their voice to make things better. That kind of support means everything." Their conversation was interrupted once again, this time by a group of patrons who had been sitting nearby. One of them, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, approached their table hesitantly. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, addressing Shaq. "What you did was incredible. It's not easy to stand up like that, especially in front of a crowd." Shaq smiled warmly. "It's the least I could do," he said. "But it shouldn't take someone like me to make people speak up. We all have that responsibility." The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're right. I just wish more people had the courage to do what you did." As the woman returned to her table, Amina turned to Shaq, her eyes filled with gratitude. "She's right, you know. Not everyone would have done what you did. You didn't have to get involved, but you did anyway. That means a lot." Shaq shrugged modestly, but there was a sincerity in his eyes. "I've been in a lot of situations where I saw people being treated unfairly," he said. "And I've learned that if you have the ability to step in and help, you should. That's how we make the world better, by looking out for each other." As their conversation continued, Amina felt her initial unease from the incident begin to fade. Shaq's kindness and wisdom were reassuring, and she found herself inspired by his perspective. By the time they finished their coffee, she felt a renewed sense of strength and determination. Before they parted ways, Shaq gave her a warm handshake. "You keep doing what you're doing," he said. "The work you're doing with your nonprofit, that's the real game changer. And if there's ever anything I can do to help, let me know." Amina's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? You mean that?" "Absolutely," Shaq said with a grin. "I've got a big platform and I'd be happy to use it to support a good cause like yours. Just let me know." Amina felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you so much," she said. "I'll definitely reach out." As Shaq left the cafe, Amina watched him go, her heart filled with a mix of gratitude and hope. The encounter had been unexpected, but it had reminded her of the power of kindness and the importance of standing up for what's right. That evening, Amina returned home and reflected on the day's events. She thought about the man who had harassed her, the bystanders who had stayed silent, and the people who had spoken up afterward. But most of all, she thought about Shaq and the way he had turned a moment of pain into one of empowerment. She decided to channel that experience into her work, using it as fuel to drive her next project. She wanted to create a campaign that would encourage people to stand up against hate and prejudice, just as Shaq had done for her. It was a daunting task, but Amina felt ready to take it on. After sending her reply to the man who had harassed her, Amina felt a strange sense of closure. While his apology couldn't erase the pain of that day, it symbolized the power of change, proof that people could learn from their mistakes if they were willing to reflect. She shared the experience with her team, not to celebrate his apology, but to remind them why stand together mattered. "This is why we're doing this," Amina said during a team meeting. "Because even the smallest steps toward understanding can lead to meaningful change. It's not about being perfect, it's about being willing to grow." Her team nodded in agreement, their resolve stronger than ever. The campaign had already made waves, but Amina was determined to push it even further. With the success of the first event behind them, they began planning a national tour, partnering with organizations in cities across the country to host workshops and rallies. One of the most anticipated stops on the tour was Los Angeles, where Shaq had offered to host a special event. The venue was a large community center, and the turnout exceeded everyone's expectations. Families, activists, and local leaders filled the space, eager to be part of the movement. As Amina prepared to take the stage, she felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This was the largest crowd she had ever addressed, and the stakes felt higher than ever. But as she glanced at Shaq, who stood nearby with his reassuring presence, her nerves settled. She reminded herself that this wasn't about her, it was about the message. When she stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. Amina took a deep breath and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," she said, her voice steady and clear. "When we started Stand Together, we couldn't have imagined the impact it would have. What began as a small idea has grown into a movement, thanks to people like you, people who believe in the power of kindness, empathy, and courage." She paused, scanning the crowd. "Today, I want to talk about something we all have in common, the ability to make a difference. You don't have to be a celebrity or a leader to create change. It starts with small, everyday actions. Choosing to stand up for someone, to speak out against injustice, to show kindness in the face of hate." The crowd erupted into applause, and Amina felt her confidence grow. She shared her story, not as a tale of victimhood but as an example of resilience and empowerment. She spoke about the importance of allies like Shaq, who used their voices to uplift others, and encouraged everyone in the room to do the same. When Shaq took the stage, the energy in the room shifted. His natural charisma and larger-than-life presence commanded attention, but his words were humble and heartfelt. "I'm just a guy who saw someone being treated unfairly and decided to step in," Shaq began, his deep voice resonating through the room. "But the truth is, we all have that power. You don't have to be a 7-foot-tall basketball player to make a difference. What matters is your heart, your courage, and your willingness to do what's right." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "I've seen a lot in my life, good and bad. But one thing I've learned is that hate doesn't solve anything. Kindness, empathy, and understanding, that's what changes the world. And that's what this movement is all about." The crowd cheered, their enthusiasm filling the space. Shaq's words were simple but profound, and they resonated deeply with everyone in the room. After the event, Amina and Shaq stayed to meet attendees, answering questions, taking photos, and listening to stories. One young woman, wearing a hijab like Amina's, approached them with tears in her eyes. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "I've faced so much discrimination because of my faith, and it's been so hard to feel like I belong. But seeing you both up there standing together, it gives me hope." Amina felt her throat tighten as she placed a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. "You do belong," she said gently. "And you're not alone. There are so many of us who stand with you." Shaq nodded, his voice warm. "She's right. And remember, you're stronger than any of the hate you've faced. Keep being proud of who you are." The woman smiled through her tears, her gratitude evident. "Thank you," she said. "You've inspired me more than I can say." As the tour continued, Amina saw the impact of Stand Together firsthand. Each event brought new faces, new stories, and new allies. The campaign's message spread like wildfire, reaching people in schools, workplaces, and communities across the country. Social media was flooded with posts using the hashtag #StandTogether, with people sharing their own stories of courage and kindness. One post that caught Amina's attention was from a high school student named Noah. He shared how he had stood up for a classmate who was being bullied for wearing a turban, inspired by Amina and Shaq's story. "I used to think it wasn't my place to get involved," Noah wrote. "But after hearing about Stand Together, I realized that staying silent is just as bad as being part of the problem. I'm proud to say I made a difference today." Amina shared Noah's post on the campaign's account, adding a message of encouragement. "You're the future," she wrote. "Thank you for standing up for what's right. Together we can change the world." By the time the tour ended, Stand Together had become a national phenomenon. The campaign had reached millions of people, sparking conversations and inspiring action on a scale Amina had never imagined. But for her, the most rewarding part wasn't the numbers, it was the individual stories of change and empowerment. One evening, as she sat in her office reflecting on the journey, she received a surprise phone call from Shaq. "Hey Amina," he said, his tone light-hearted. "I've been thinking. This campaign of yours, it's amazing. But I don't think we're done yet." Amina laughed, her heart lifting at his enthusiasm. "What do you mean?" "I mean we've got to take this global," Shaq said. "There are people all over the world who need to hear this message. Let's make it happen." Amina felt a surge of excitement. The idea of taking Stand Together to an international audience was daunting, but with Shaq by her side, she knew it was possible. "Let's do it," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Let's stand together no matter where we are." The idea of taking Stand Together global was exhilarating but also overwhelming. Amina knew the logistics would be complicated, and the scope of the project was far larger than anything she had ever tackled. But with Shaq's support and the momentum the campaign had already built, she was confident they could make it happen. Amina and her team got to work immediately, reaching out to international organizations, activists, and communities that could help expand the campaign's reach. Their goal was to create a series of events, workshops, and digital initiatives that would connect people across cultures and countries, all under the shared mission of fostering empathy and standing against prejudice. The first global Stand Together event was scheduled to take place in London, a city known for its diversity and vibrant community spirit. Amina arrived a week early to meet with local partners and finalize the details. As she walked through the streets of London, taking in the city's energy, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her story anymore, it was about creating a movement that transcended borders. Shaq arrived a few days later, his presence immediately drawing attention wherever he went. Despite his celebrity status, he remained humble and focused, working alongside Amina and her team to ensure the event's success. They visited schools, community centers, and local businesses, spreading the word about the campaign and encouraging people to attend. On the day of the event, the venue, a sprawling outdoor plaza, was packed with people from all walks of life. Families with young children, teenagers holding signs with the hashtag stand together, and elders in traditional attire all gathered to be part of the movement. The sight was overwhelming, and Amina felt a lump in her throat as she looked out at the crowd. As she stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause. Amina took a moment to absorb the energy before speaking. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady despite the emotions coursing through her. "When we started Stand Together, we had no idea it would grow into what it is today. What began as a simple act of standing up against hate has become a global movement, and that's because of people like you." She paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. "We're here today because we believe in the power of kindness and empathy. We believe that standing together is stronger than standing alone. And we believe that change starts with each of us." The audience cheered, their enthusiasm palpable. Amina shared her story once again, weaving it into a message of hope and resilience. She spoke about the challenges of confronting prejudice and the importance of finding strength in unity. When Shaq took the stage, the atmosphere shifted once more. His natural charisma and larger-than-life presence captivated the crowd, but it was his humility that left the deepest impression. "I've traveled the world," Shaq began, his voice resonating across the plaza. "And one thing I've learned is that we're more alike than we are different. We all want to be treated with respect. We all want to feel like we belong. And we all have the power to make that happen." He gestured to the crowd, his expression earnest. "This isn't just about standing up for others, it's about standing up for ourselves, for our communities, and for the world we want to build. And it starts right here, right now, with all of us." The crowd roared with approval, their cheers echoing through the plaza. Amina watched from the side of the stage, her heart swelling with pride. This was exactly what she had envisioned, a movement that brought people together, breaking down barriers and building bridges of understanding. As the event continued, attendees participated in workshops and activities designed to foster empathy and encourage action. Children painted murals with messages of kindness, while adults joined discussions about how to address discrimination in their communities. The atmosphere was electric, filled with a sense of possibility and hope. One moment that stood out to Amina came when a young boy approached her with his parents. The boy, no older than 10, handed her a drawing he had made. It showed two stick figures holding hands, one wearing a hijab and the other holding a basketball. "This is you and Shaq," the boy said shyly. "You're standing together." Amina felt tears prick her eyes as she accepted the drawing. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This is beautiful. I'm going to keep it forever." The London event was a resounding success, and it set the tone for the rest of the global tour. From Paris to Mumbai, Sydney to Johannesburg, Stand Together brought people together in ways Amina had only dreamed of. Each city added its own unique flavor to the campaign, showcasing the diversity and resilience of the human spirit. In Mumbai, Amina and Shaq met with local activists who had been fighting caste-based discrimination. In Sydney, they visited an indigenous community and learned about their struggles and triumphs. In Johannesburg, they worked with youth leaders who were transforming their neighborhoods through education and advocacy. Everywhere they went, the message was the same: kindness and empathy could change the world. As the tour progressed, Amina found herself reflecting on how much she had grown. The shy, uncertain woman who had walked into that cafe months ago was now a confident leader, speaking to thousands of people and inspiring action on a global scale. She often thought about Shaq and the role he had played in her journey, not just as an ally but as a friend and mentor. One evening, after an event in Tokyo, Amina and Shaq sat together on a quiet rooftop, overlooking the city's glittering skyline. They shared stories and laughs, their bond stronger than ever. "You've come a long way," Shaq said, his tone thoughtful. "From that cafe to this rooftop. How does it feel?" Amina smiled, her eyes reflecting the city lights. "It feels surreal," she admitted, "but also right. Like this is what I was meant to do." Shaq nodded, his expression warm. "You've done something incredible, Amina. You've turned pain into purpose. Not everyone can do that." Amina looked at him, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You believed in me when I wasn't sure I could do this. That made all the difference." Shaq smiled, his voice soft. "You always had it in you. I just gave you a little push." As the global tour came to an end, Amina felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The campaign had reached millions of people, sparking conversations, inspiring action, and creating lasting change. But more than that, it had shown her the power of standing together, of finding strength in unity and using it to build a better world. She returned home with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to take Stand Together to even greater heights. Because while the tour had ended, the movement was only just beginning. The success of the Stand Together global tour had exceeded everyone's expectations. Amina returned home to a flood of emails, messages, and calls from people all over the world. Some wanted to thank her for inspiring them, others sought advice on how to start similar initiatives in their own communities, and many simply wanted to share their stories. As Amina sifted through the messages, she realized just how much the campaign had resonated. What had started as a painful incident in a cafe had grown into a worldwide movement, uniting people from different cultures, backgrounds, and beliefs. It was humbling, but it also reinforced the weight of responsibility she felt. She knew there was still so much work to be done. One of the messages that stood out to her was from Noah, the high school student who had previously shared his story about standing up for a classmate. This time, Noah wrote to update her on how things had changed since then. "Hi Amina," the email began. "I wanted to let you know that your campaign didn't just inspire me to stand up for my classmate, it inspired my whole school. After I shared what happened, my teacher suggested we start a kindness club, and now we meet every week to talk about ways we can make our school more inclusive. It's been amazing to see how many people want to help. Thank you for showing me that one person can make a difference." Amina smiled as she read the message, her heart swelling with pride. She shared Noah's story with her team, using it as an example of how the ripple effects of kindness could create lasting change. Back at her nonprofit, Amina began planning the next phase of Stand Together. She wanted to build on the momentum of the global tour and create a sustainable model that could continue to grow and evolve. Her vision included expanding the campaign's digital presence, creating educational resources for schools and workplaces, and partnering with more organizations to reach underserved communities. One of her top priorities was developing a mentorship program for young activists. Amina knew firsthand how important it was to have role models and allies, and she wanted to create a network that could empower the next generation of changemakers. She reached out to Shaq to share her plans, knowing he would have valuable insights. "I love it," Shaq said when they spoke on the phone. "Mentorship is everything. If we can give young people the tools and support they need, they'll take this movement to places we can't even imagine." Amina grinned, her excitement growing. "That's exactly what I was thinking. And with your platform we could reach so many more people." "Count me in," Shaq said without hesitation. "Whatever you need, I'm here." With Shaq's backing, Amina and her team launched the mentorship program, calling it Future Leaders Together. The program paired experienced activists and advocates with young people who wanted to make a difference in their communities. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of applications pouring in within the first week. One of the first men's in the program was a young woman named Layla, who reminded Amina of herself in many ways. Layla was passionate, driven, and deeply committed to making her community a better place, but she often doubted her abilities. During their first mentorship session, Amina listened as Layla shared her dreams and fears. "I want to start a project to support refugee families," Layla said. "But I'm scared I'm not good enough. What if I fail?" Amina smiled gently. "Layla, I used to feel the same way. When I started Stand Together, I had no idea what I was doing. But I learned that it's okay to feel uncertain. What matters is that you take that first step and trust yourself. You're stronger than you think." Layla nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Thank you," she said. "I'll do my best." As the mentorship program grew, so did its impact. Men's like Layla began launching their own initiatives, tackling issues ranging from food insecurity to environmental justice. Each project was a testament to the power of Amina's vision and the strength of the movement she had built. One day, as Amina reviewed updates from the program, she received an unexpected call from the cafe manager where the initial incident had taken place. His voice was warm and slightly nervous as he explained why he was calling. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "After what happened that day, I realized we needed to do better. I started looking into diversity training for our staff, and it's made a huge difference. Our cafe is a different place now, a better place. And it's all because of you." Amina felt a lump in her throat as she listened. "Thank you for sharing that," she said. "It means so much to know that positive change is happening." The manager hesitated before adding, "We'd love to have you back someday as our guest. You'll always have a place here." Amina smiled, her heart full. "I'd like that," she said. The months turned into years and Stand Together continued to thrive. The campaign had become a global movement, touching millions of lives and inspiring countless acts of kindness and courage. Amina's work earned her recognition and awards, but what mattered most to her was the stories of change she heard from people around the world. One evening, as Amina prepared for yet another speaking engagement, she received a message from Shaq. It was simple but heartfelt. "Look at what you've done. I'm so proud of you." Amina replied with a smile, "I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for standing with me." At the speaking engagement, Amina stood before an audience of thousands, reflecting on everything that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the incident at the cafe, the pain and humiliation she had felt, and how Shaq's intervention had turned it into a turning point. "When I walked into that cafe, I never imagined it would change my life," Amina said, her voice steady. "But that experience taught me something important, that even in our darkest moments, there's an opportunity for light. We all have the power to create that light, to stand together and make a difference." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "This movement isn't about me or Shaq or any one person. It's about all of us. It's about believing in the power of kindness, empathy, and courage to change the world. And I know that together we can." The audience erupted into applause, and Amina felt a sense of fulfillment she couldn't put into words. Her journey had been challenging, but it had also been beautiful, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the impact of standing together. That night, as Amina walked off the stage, she felt a deep sense of peace. The work wasn't finished, it never would be, but she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. She had found her purpose, and she was ready to keep building a world where everyone could belong. And she knew without a doubt that she would never stand alone.